Yeah, no, so you have some specific Cosmos related questions as you were building this for some of your students. One of the first questions that you brought up was the cluster specific. So one of the guidance I had given to you and to the other students or to all the students was to keep a cluster on kind of 4 dimensions of what do you bring to the class, what what intellectual curiosity did something you did on the prerequisite stimulate you over here. I think the most important thing, so there are the 4 tenets, which again are my perspectives. They don't have to be the way it is. I just thought they were logically in that direction. Most important is understand the person who's reading this is a professor. And that professor is expecting you to talk something related to, it doesn't have to be focused so heavy on career, but it has to be focused on why this subject is interesting to me. So I would say it's more like 5-10% to career, but it's mostly what about this cohort would have I not learned in a Coursera course outside, or why do I want to meet with this professor for a whole month? Because maybe there's a like maybe you're doing something in physics and you're saying I want to do AP physics, electromagnetism, or thermodynamics next year. I'm thinking about why. I'm still making up my mind. So this cluster will help me with this. Maybe it's some career perspective that you get intrigued by research that that professor has done that you want to build on over here. Maybe there's something you read in a newsletter from one of those teachers as you were putting the material together. So those things go into play with the cluster logic. Again, you only have 200 words, so you'd have to be fairly judicious with not getting carried away with all kinds of content. But go ahead. I mean, you can ask some questions based on this as well, and we can keep it interactive.
Oh, I was thinking, if we can give them like a short 4 questions that should map into the essay you write, right? Like what intrigued you? In fact, I find it like for 200 words, if they don't even mention the name of the cluster, that leaves you wondering, isn't that the first point you need to get in? I am extremely interested in this cluster. And then start over, an anecdotal story of why this interest developed. So, why are you intrigued about this?
Yeah.
What do you look forward to towards your possible major selection in the future or career in the future? How would this help you there? Start with a small anecdotal story, how this interest developed and why you're here, and how do you think Cosmos will specifically help you in learning things that are very uniquely Cosmos, not as you said about a $200 course in Coursera or elsewhere. What is the Cosmos factor that is pulling you to this, right? You're there for a reason. You want to apply for a reason. And then something that makes you stand apart, if you can conclude that way.
I mean,
So
the
those may
Cosmos
be.
factor is really about the community.
Mm.
I'm looking to work with this professor over a month to learn more, but to meet some other interested students so I can perhaps meet my future college colleagues in the process, or maybe I can triangulate with a senior year student on or a PhD student on research they're doing in related fields. So I I have interest. This is how I built some of my interests. I have my own reservations about what I'm doing here. Um, but I've been doing research in the past. I've done some common research, for example, in this particular field. And I every time I did research, I blew it because I was not as methodical. But over the years, I have improved in that area. And that's what I want to work with the other students on. So spend a whole year, a whole month, and build. So it's less about why Cosmos. It's more about why that cluster professor, why that the major is going to intrigue you about. And in some ways, it's like when I talk to the students and they say this cluster, and they say, okay, tell me about this cluster. What's exciting? And that recording that I pick up from that discussion is usually the most important one. If they're just bullshitting their way, if they're just trying to figure out because it looks cool on the resume, they want to do a machine learning project, I call it
Mm.
outright. They say this cluster is not for you, forget it. So I think one of the first steps these students have to do, if they have already not done it, is meet with me to go over just a cluster level decisioning process, saying, okay, which cluster they're applying to. Does it even show well in your resume? And then it just builds from there. Okay.
And is there a tip or advice that we need to think about students who don't have the background yet? Because we encourage them to apply too, right? Like to learn the process and try. So if they don't have experience, can then perhaps they can pull in something like, oh, I was listening to this chapter taught by my physics teacher. Thermodynamics was really interesting. And so that got me intrigued into thinking about this project I looked up. And then I'm intrigued to come and study this in this cluster because Professor so and so's work seems very interesting and I cannot wait to learn more. So maybe that would be a meaningful way to, though they don't have the experience or research from before, they can build on their interest and project it positively to make a case for them.
I mean, you
Is
could
that
take
something?
the case of, as you read through the cluster details, you could talk about the initial part of the cluster. I got super excited, but the remainder, I was totally lost. But it clearly, it's something which is important to this industry. And the more I read about it, I started getting a grasp of it. But that's exactly what I hope to build on in the class, because this career means the world to me, because I'm intrigued with this aspect of humanity or whatever that might be.
Oh,